The survival of his DNA code has been the prime factor around which mankind has evolved. We are able to control, vary and counter the code, and the media incessantly wrangles over such matters as human cloning, often with an aim of increasing the planetary population, its welfare and quality of life. However, we must now make long-term decisions, and advanced thinkers, taking into account such factors as terrorism, planetary epidemics and nuclear missiles, seem to be increasingly deciding other courses of action to make certain that the DNA code survives a planetary disaster, and all this implies spiritually to the individual and to humanity collectively.
We are all concerned about the dive in popularity of theosophy. We don't like it, and we all look for causes of it. And some of us who have lectured extensively around the world to the theosophists have our conclusions. And one of the conclusions is that theosophy is a massive, broad, so wide a proposition that it is difficult to grasp even when presented by expert teachers. Worse than that, the truth is that in order to embrace theosophy at its wide tenaes, we have to be prepared to, as it were, extend ourselves to such an extent that we have to work at it. And this is one of the problems, especially in England but elsewhere, that the public, the theosophists, don't like to spend the time working on these very difficult propositions. And they are eternal. We dare to talk about reincarnation. What we're really saying is that reincarnation offers an explanation for immortality, that we can live for an eternity. How will we live for an eternity? Well, reincarnation, a series of lives on one planet and perhaps on another, supplies an answer to that. But you know, the probing of reincarnation is really asking, it's eternity out there. It's eternity in terms of space, and it's an eternity in terms of time. And it's all very well saying, yes, I believe in immortality and we're going to live forever. How? Where? Under what conditions? I'm one of those who are optimistic about it. I'm a doctor of medicine. I've been through the halls of learning. I've looked at anatomy very, very, very intimately, esoterically as well as in the laboratories. And I'm a believer that given sufficient time, we can present our physical bodies and our subtler bodies to any planet in the universe. And given enough time, we could adapt to that particular planet, because we have everything incorporated in us. And the incorporation implies a mental body that can live on a very, very hot planet like Mercury, an astral body that has had extensive experience on our Earth planet and its early history, and so on. We have all the facilities there for living out a complete life in the universe. And nobody knows when the universe began. Nobody knows when the universe is going to end, or that its extent is limited. The moment you say there is a limit to the universe, and you want to know, well, what is the hedge that's hedging the universe in? And the moment you talk about a hedge or a gully or a moat or a band of of stars or gases or whatever. You're talking about something bigger than the universe. And it's an impossible situation, because if, like me, we accept that theosophy can take you to a position where you can embrace eternity and all that goes with it, then of course the way you deal with the problems of mankind is changed completely. We have all the time in the world to solve our problems. Everything that we can think of becomes manifestly possible because we're living in a universe that is eternal, and sooner or later it's bound to happen if it's eternal. And if you think this guy has been, well, if he's round the bend, he's gaga in his old age, you should have a look at the science papers today, because that's the direction they're taking themselves. And so one of our problems in theosophy is constantly to try and present ancient teachings in the language of the day and to get people to give an ear to it. And it's very, very hard, and we are failing. We are somehow missing the boat. This matter of theosophy, this huge concept. And the reason why I've started on this note, you must call it surely not optimistic, the reason why I've started on this note is because part of the reason why we undertake such massive studies, massive investigations. I have 20 different research projects operating at any particular moment, and I'm involved in them. They take time. And why do we do it? And why have I linked it to DNA, the investigation of DNA? Because an extraordinary thing has happened recently. An extraordinary thing. DNA became important to theosophy for many reasons, and we have again missed the opportunity of grasping these opportunities. When we talk about a permanent atom, when we say in theosophy that my struggles in this life will be recorded in my permanent atom, and when I incarnate again, they will be taken into account, and the appropriate chakra will be opened not 1-3 feet below. A permanent atom. It was an inconceivable matter 50 years ago. Not inconceivable today. If you have a look at all the latest scientific research, nanotechnology, and so on, everything is there. And all we have to do is stick to our guns and say there is absolutely no fundamental reason against the concept of a permanent atom, that we do build on our consciousness life after life and contribute to it, so that it is like a cosmic bank. And we get the reward of those previous lives' efforts delivered to us through karma in the current life and lives to come. And so this matter of DNA, perhaps many of you know more about the biology of it than I do. All I know is it gets more and more complicated as the years go by. But I have had an esoteric, occult, if you like, training, and I know what to look for. And there are several things developing into problems for humanity, which I am aware of, and I'm not aware that anybody else is. And they arise out of simple problems, simple things, like the fall in fertility of the human male. Massively. If you take 100 as being a starting point, say 50 years ago, it's dropped to something like 40%. Nobody seems to be particularly concerned. Men are not encouraged to retain their semen States are not being encouraged to store semen in case this is progressive and continues, and that in another 2 or 3 or 4,000 years we are struggling to get virulent forms of spermatozoa. It is a problem. And so we ask ourselves, well, is there anything esoteric behind this? We know that if you have a world war, then the male birth rate goes up in a world war. Men are dying all over the place abnormally, pathologically. And in some way, we don't know how, the male birth rate rises when men are being killed massively in war. And there are certain factors, very, very deep esoteric factors related to Madame Blavatsky that are of our concern when we begin to approach the subject of the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid, which together creates in code a composition of magically aligned formulae which dictate to the cells of our bodies what kind of protein they should develop. Codings which go from the chromosomes of our seed, our human seed, to the cells of the body, hair cells telling them to produce a substance which will allow a hair which weight for weight is 30 times stronger than the finest steel in the tension it can bear. And the nails that enable us to, and the cells of the liver and the bone and the kidneys, all these proteins, these tissues are proteins that are instructed by the genetic content of your chromosomes. So how they're to be built. How are they to be built? Take so many atoms of this and of that and create molecules of that and combine them and bring amino acids and any of the essential. It's an extraordinary thing. And it amazes me in the face of such outcries by science that we are living in a universe that has no beginning and will have no end and is eternal, and such outcries, we can consider that DNA, this coding in every one of our cells, was fashioned, formed, put together in a matter of 2 or 3 billion years. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. And the finest minds of mankind are saying you can take all the knots that make up the total number of atoms in the universe, and you will find that the chance of DNA being formed by nature, being formed by chance, goes 1 in billions and billions and billions and billions. But it's here. And it's been functioning on the earth for 3 billion years. And this functioning of the DNA is effective in all the forms that we know, in all the thousands and thousands and thousands of species, of plants, of animals, of humans that we know of on our planet. And it's the same sort of formula for all of them. And what is more, this kind of life bursts forth. It isn't something that you have to whistle for. It isn't something that you have to put billions of dollars aside to encourage to express itself. Life froths out and has done for 3 billion years. And we still don't know what it is, except that somehow the formula of the DNA coding enables the form for the life to be built and the life can get into it. And of course it's very disheartening. It's very disheartening to have such excellent explanations for some of our human problems, which are as clear as anything. And then for science to come along and say, that's nonsense. We descended from apes, and the apes were in Africa. And in Africa they were in the Orabi Gorge. And that is that, and that is final. It isn't true. It just isn't true. And when you see the human forms lined up in the museums to present a deliberate manifestation of intent to say that we arose from apes, when this row was going on in the Victorian age, they said to Disraeli, the new Prime Minister, they said, what do you think about this matter of Darwin and the origin of species and our descent from apes and so on? He said, well, if it's a matter of apes and angels, I'm on the side of the angels. We come from angels, not from the apes. I agree with him. You see, many of the expressions of our origin are lost. We lost a wonderful example when somehow or the other the greatest scientists of the early part of the last century, Sir Oliver Lodge and Richard Crookes and others, were involved in materialization, where they were able to show that given a sufficiently subtle material like ectoplasm, it is possible for astral life forms to materialize in ectoplasm and to manifest themselves like an ordinary form. Now, if that is so, if it was so, and the evidence is still there for examination, if it was so, then it's pretty likely that of mankind, because of the terrible frigid conditions that developed on the earth 15,000 years ago, it is possible that man, hiding in caves away from the cold and before blazes inside the caves, created conditions there where it might have been possible for mental and emotional humanity, very, very old, deriving from other systems and planets, might have been able to materialize a form, still subtle, though now physical, which was able to implant certain factors in the females gathered in the caves, which might change, mutate their genes and chromosomes to produce a taller, a fairer race, and so on, than what is pointed to by anthropologists to our origins in Africa. And it needs to be traced. So here we are, we're looking at the matter of the DNA coding. You and I in theosophy have grown up with an understanding that two snakes contain the mystery of form to such an extent that when they are associated, there is a descent of life force into the form, the caduceus so-called. No, it isn't just by chance that we chose a double helix for this pattern in our caduceus, because that is vaguely the outline of the nature of the DNA molecule. When we look to Madame Blavatsky and all the books that she derived material from, and her intuition and so on, the thing that stands out to me as a doctor of medicine as a student of anatomy and physiology, and as of a student also of primitive races like the Zulus and Natal, it stands out to me that her main contribution, backing this concept of immortality and so on, and the powers latent in man, the thing that stands out to me is the contribution she made to the anatomy of the whole thing. Here, whatever round it was, we would arrive on the planet, any planet, but the Earth in particular. And we were amoeba-like structures, hardly with any form, shape at all. And then we went through a process, less along these lines, in which, in the first root race, to propagate, we just divided. It was under an influence which a form of yoga, which duplicates. And when you come through the races, up to the seventh, this kind of yoga, Kriya Yoga, enables us to duplicate ourselves. We duplicate it by visualization. And it is a tremendously enhancing factor in our spiritual growth when we deliberately, willfully, in meditation or in a process seated with attention in the space between the eyebrows, create forms there, especially forms that we know and have seen and have apprehended and are now creating with our own thought substance. Kriya Yoga. Getting away from it. So this first root race was the root race in which there was division. Just division. Replication of the physical body of the first root race in a particular round. And then in the second root race, there was budding, Madame Blavatsky described it. How part of the abdomen would swell and grow, and with certain attitudes and intents, there became, as it were, separated from the human form of that time, a structure which produced a child of the particular form. And then the third root race, she talks about, of course, the third root race, you get the birth of the duality of sexual organs, the hermaphrodite, plain and simple, the development of hermaphroditic organs manifesting in the first subraces of the third root race. And then in the fourth, emphasis of one or either of the two sexes, heterosexuality being the method of reproduction. And so we know that this goes on, as it were, in every time there is a round of human development in consciousness. There are problems today. There are problems today. Joe, could I ask you to turn the sheet over on the board? Thank you. There are problems today in this field. You see, it isn't just the sexuality that we are concerned with. It's the fact that the sexuality implies higher forms. There's a human being. A human being, there is the symbol of the planet Uranus, and there is a human capable of reproducing himself. And the growth of the human is that he must extend his consciousness from the body part up through the neck into the head region. And here we have the throwing forth of the seed into a fertile area and the growth of the child. Here we must throw forth again by Kriya Yoga, by replication of our own thought essence. We must throw forth images of forms that will go out into the world as Plato described it, and will populate, refurnish. Our ideas, our ideals can emanate from us and pass out into the world. The 2 world wars have produced tremendous change. There isn't a person in this room who has not been confronted with vast changes going on in human consciousness under the stimulus of an environment that constantly charges our reserves of sensation, our eyes and our ears and our touch and our taste. We're being overwhelmed all the time by this massive input of our environments. And they change every 10, 20, 50 years. And our Prime Minister has to say to us, for God's sake, get out there and be prepared to be re-instructed, to be retrained at least 4 times in a lifetime, because things are changing so quickly. And they are. And they are. And one of the welcome changes, you must remember these things. The Greek philosophers elaborated the solution to political problems which we call democracy. But this country had to practice democracy for 1,000 years before it could get it more or less right. And it is nonsense to expect that democracy can be immediately successful in all the little states springing into existence today. And the great liberating factor of our age has been the liberation of women. And again, it was in this country that the first struggles for the liberation of women were fought. On our race courses, with women running in front of charging horses, manacling themselves to iron railings. And the struggle went on, and it has come in great part to fruition. Whether it has gone too fast or not, I don't know. I'm a feminist. I can name at least 10 famous women who played a part in my life. But I do not like to see women in the army. I do not like to see women soldiers who, brutalized as you must expect to be under war conditions, treat men as they have been treated recently in Iraq. There are warning signs going up all over the place. Don't let it go too quickly, too fast. Be careful. And one of the warning signs is the shrinking of the Y chromosome. The shrinking of the Y chromosome, which is the chromosome that gives a male child, compared to the, call it the Y, the X chromosome, I think I've got the wrong colors, never mind, of the female, the X chromosome, which is practically unaffected by the change in circumstances. Now note that these changes that I'm talking about are at a psychological level, sociological, at levels of thought and feeling that are going on in your world around us, and they are beginning to produce a reflex, I don't know how, nor do the evolutionists, a reflex action on the Y chromosome of the male, the human male. And it has shrunk over the last millions of years, shrunk and lost and lost and lost the substance that it once had. And it is giving out certain warning signs. It is giving out certain warning signs, not just the lowering of sperm count, inexplicably, the lowering of sperm count. It's giving out warning signs by making parts of itself, only about 60, 84, 96 odd genes involved here. And these genes are seeking a male, perhaps I shouldn't use that word, determined change in themselves. This chromosome is changed. The effects are such that instead of it merging with the genetic products of women, as it would normally do, it is now avoiding contact with female genetic processes, avoiding it. And it's uncanny because here you have the parallel in society of women becoming more dominant, as they should be, compared to what they were, but it being reflected immediately in the Y chromosome, and with sudden results which are upsetting, and the loss of virility in the Y chromosome for some of its parts, and increasing the element of Herculean expression. Herculean expression. The expression of physique, toughness, records in sport, and so on. The female chromosome, and female psychologically, it is well agreed, are beginning to find men less attractive. Beginning to find men less attractive. The result of this seems to me, and I've been a psychologist for 60 years, seems to me to be producing actions in the world in which there's going to be a diminishment of attractive forces between the sexes. Everywhere you go, if you're looking into the male species, you will find the most terrible stories. You'll say, yes, well, what would you expect? But no, if you are quite impartial, you're finding the most terrible stories coming out about new expressions of marriage and new attitudes of the youth of today towards the problems, towards the method of marriage and having children and so on. It's no less with the women. The women are as determined as the men that they will not be pushed about, and there is sexual piracy where a woman chooses a career, quite rightly, if that's what she wants, and she doesn't want children, but I've never seen a woman able to achieve both at once. And we have examples of women who set themselves up in business in the world, do very well, and are a credit to the female species. And yet they are determined that they will choose the kind of father they're going to have for their child. They're going to choose the father. And if they like a person's appearance, his manifestation, they will set them, even though they may say, I don't like him as a person, I don't want him as a husband, but I would like my child to be born of him as its father. And sexual piracy is going on. They tell you about it. They tell me about it. In which the male is induced to a compromising situation in which his semen is taken and placed inside the woman who would like to have his child. Now, if you look at any of these things as a policeman would, and add to it other factors like girls and boys maturing sexually at 9 and 10. It's around the corner. It used to be 15 and 16. It's dropping all the time. They're maturing earlier. If you add this to it, and the situation of a father who has a fully mature sexually daughter of 9 years of age, does that mean that his behavior must be changed, or he might be in danger of being blamed for something? Is the Oedipus thing rearing its head? So, if you wanted to talk, and it's nice to be able to come to a meeting like this, especially after my own summer school, where we had intimate talks as well. It's nice to come and express some of the uneasiness that is arising from changes that are going on. And there's no doubt in my mind that a third sex is emerging. No doubt at all. There's a large percentage of young males who don't want sport. They don't want sports even if they are mild sports, like tennis, compared to rugby, which is rough and tumble. They don't want it. They want something else. And unfortunately, society is not offering them something else. In fact, is balking at any attempt of such individuals who are growing up insecure. Not as secure as a married man with a family and children and estate and everything behind them and public approbation. That's not there. These youths are growing up and they haven't got that Hollywood attitude of chercher la femme. That's French, isn't it? Okay. Chasing the girls, always having to have a girl on the go. I don't see it anywhere. Now and again it's acted out. And it's the same with the women. I like it. I like to see women together, 3, 4 of them, getting together, and they'll even go into a pub where I eat once or twice a week. They'll even go into a pub and sit down and enjoy themselves over a few beers and so on. And the whole aspect of being the male ever being present is not there so much as it used to be. There have been big changes in sexual teachings. All the old ideas of orgasm were based on the male attitude. Oh, it was fun and games, and it worked up to a climax, and when the climax came, there was this bursting through, and I was left devastated. It was wonderful. And the women weren't having it, because women have a different type of orgasm, and they're entitled to have a different type of orgasm. And all these things have to be considered. And when we look at the DNA molecule today, we're looking at this extraordinary coding that is so precious to us. When you think of anything that you have making up your form, the color of your eyes, the duracity of your skin against sunlight, the thickness of your hair, the lack of it, the this, the that. Every single one of these thousands and thousands and thousands of characteristics are created mechanically through a coding on the DNA molecule. It is materialization occurring in such a way that you can follow it. You can tick it all the way down to the construction of proteins that are diabolically difficult to construct. And it's all there. Now my climax is quite simple. May I have another clean sheet? Isn't it nice to have a clean sheet in life? Why is science not as aware as theosophy of some of the problems that I have been raising here? And we will have a chance to discuss them. The answer is quite simple, and of course it applies to the female as well to a certain degree. Sperm, 500 million a day in men, each capable of producing under ideal conditions a good specimen of humanity. But that's not the problem. The problem is this. The problem is that the sperm have got an astral form. The sperms have an astral form to them. And the astral form is susceptible to mutation. The kind of mutation that might only come to a physical part of the body perhaps once in 10,000 or 20,000 years, this is not true of the astral part of the sperm. It is susceptible to emotional mutations. And we say that whilst there may only be a few mutations at the physical level, where the DNA is creating physical parts, at the emotional, at the astral level, we are inundated with stimuli that could change by mutation the content of the astral genes. Now, if you don't like this, then you should leave theosophy alone. But you can't have theosophy manifesting itself as a physical body, as an astral counterpart, and as a mental body, and then the higher mental and so on. If you believe in that, and you should if you're a theosophist, you have to accept this. And I must add to this the fact that there is also a mental form of the spermatozoa, and it is susceptible to mental stimuli and mutation. And now when you consider the number of physical mutations, when you start to get to these, you're running into billions. And this is what we need to understand. And only 30 or 40 years ago, the physics of this was not there. All you had was Einsteinian physics, which everyone learnt at school. Since then, however, there's the physics emerging of quantum physics, and quantum physics is concerned with these particles, 1,000,000 times, each one of them 1,000,000,000 times smaller than the hydrogen nucleus. That kind of matter. And this, all right, only 1,000,000 times smaller. Emotional matter, mental matter. And then we have to say to ourselves, all right, what's that got to do with us? The answer is simple. I can do it with you because you're theosophists and you're easy. Because you understand symbols. There it is. It's as simple as that. This explains it. This is the lower triad made up of the physical body, the astral body and the mental body, the lower triad. And out of the mental body we build an antakarana, a channel to reach the permanent atom that we have stored up for many, many lives, and with it the buddhi of the higher triad, the atma of the higher triad, and the higher manas of the higher triad. And when we build this through meditation and through disciplinary exercise, that we're not ready for it yet. And that's why the theosophy is so hard going. It's not explained properly, and we're not ready for it. But the effect of this is that the personality is flooded by the descent of the higher triad's energies into the personality. We begin to radiate. We practice psychosynthesis and so on. And all this is affecting the production of sperm. And of course the ovum, the female ovum. Now, just to finish, 20 years ago, I was doing research work, not actually on mice, rats, but the research work was well known. And the research work was that you could train rats so that they would find their way through a maze and come out at the right place at the right time. And that was wonderful. Then it was found that if that took, say, 20 hours for the rat to discover the pathway through the maze, then they found that if these rats were fed with the minced substance of earlier rats that had done it, they learned 3 times as quick how to get through the maze, because they were being fed with the substance of animals that had earlier done the same thing. It is talking to you, talking to us. And so here comes the point. The point is this. It has been found scientifically that the DNA coding is susceptible to learning, just as the coding of those rats gained something from the consuming of the material of earlier participants. It means that our DNA is susceptible to learning, not just to mutation, which has been going on for hundreds of millions of years, but to learning. And who in the world teaches us to undergo a process of self-discipline, acting on the quantum structures of the higher triad, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, and the Antakarana? We do. Even before you know what it's for specifically, we are taught, start to practice self-discipline. The effect of this will change you. If you meditate regularly, it will change you. How? How? Damn it, I've been meditating for 20 years, you may say. How does it change? Here's your answer. It changes us through the ability in meditation and other esoteric disciplines. It changes us through the ability of these higher energies related to the permanent atom to act upon the structures here, making up the genes of the DNA coding. I'm going to leave it there and suggest questions.
Very nice indeed. Very thought-provoking and penetrating talk, and I'm sure it's raised questions in lots of your minds. Would someone like to start with the first question? Yes.
On your point, which I find extremely interesting, the idea
that we are, in a way, storing away merit for the future in our DNA, or actually store away our merit or dismerit. And let's presuppose I've got two children, both are nearly adult now. What would be the benefit, and it's a very selfish question, of improving my own DNA in that the presupposition I don't intend to reproduce again and pass it on? What would be the point?
Could you put that into one short sentence, and I'll see if I can answer.
If I'm not going to reproduce, what would be the point of...
That you are generating semen.
DNA to make new offspring that I won't ever have because I don't intend to be a father.
Yes. What you're suggesting is a mistake often made by theosophists and anybody, and that is, if you have got past the age where your sperms are no longer going to produce children, what is done about it? And the answer is to be found in The Secret of the Golden Flower, but more recently the seminar that was held in this room, The Secret of the Golden Flower, which tells you that the product of germinal plasm, the product of germinal plasm can be drawn into the head region and can assist in the process of rapid unfoldment of the three head centers. Giving some support to that, it's found, for instance, that some of the genes inside the Y chromosome that I illustrated a little earlier may never leave the chromosomal area the genetic area inside the Y chromosome, but may act upon the testes at a distance. My advice to everyone who takes the path of return is to conserve the seminal fluid as long as you can, and let the body find ways of dealing with that. It will find it. I can tell you that there is expression. I'm just thinking now of Dr. John Lilly and also The Secret of the Golden Flower, how they talk about the quanta that emerge from the seminal fluid and go upwards and reach into the head region. And so don't give up. There's the whole subject of sexuality is being cursed by religion, blanketed by religion. And many things that should have come out into the world and been expressed years and years ago have been denied to the world. What am I doing sitting here hesitating to report to you comments in the latest scientific journals? Yet I hesitate. One of the comments, the most recent comments, is that male seminal fluid is an antidepressant to women. Tried and tested. And what has occurred almost concurrently with that research discovery? The episode of President Clinton. Almost concurrently. And these things are going on all the time, and we're in a world in which the police doesn't know, they don't know what the hell to do about sexuality in the community. Good question. I recommend my series on this.
This is Dr. John Lee. I was very impressed by his work on dolphins and the human fire. I understand he passed away a few years ago. Do you have any influence on that?
He may well have. I was not a companion of his, not even participating in the research work he did. But the importance of Lilly's work with dolphins and the importance of their work with whales and creatures of that ilk is that these creatures have developed brains larger than ours, and these brains of theirs have been functioning for millions and millions of years. 20, 40, 100, 200 million years, these brains have been operating in these massive sea creatures. And somehow or the other, they show what they have learnt 200 million years ago. The fact that dolphins have a benign attitude to humans, to ships, to pilots and so on, despite terrible cruelties perpetrated on them. This inherence in the dolphins suggests that they have a more holistic development of their consciousness than ours, where we are oriented to the five senses, and we are oriented to the four desires: desire for security, desire for response, desire for new experience, and desire for recognition. And you can put these things down, and that's our world of consciousness. But these dolphins and beautiful creatures of that ilk have a wholeness of their personality that we don't come anywhere close to. And they may have some contribution to make to our struggle to solve what we mean by consciousness. I've not heard science put up anything really fetching with regard to the solution of what is consciousness. And I've heard some very extraordinary stories coming out of the temples of the Hindus about consciousness, which just they don't add up. Questions?
What's the change which you were talking about between men and women coming sort of closer together, men being less virulent and women being perhaps more masculine, is due to the forming of the 6 sub-race of the physical race?
I think what we have to say is that so important is sexuality for the survival of the human race that there are other feedback mechanisms than merely the fact that the Times has reported a drop in male fertility. There are deeper warning signs, just like the endocrine system underlies the nervous system. And the endocrine system gives us slower but surer feedback than the nervous system, whose feedback is very rapid and precise. And all I'm asking is, let's look at these subjects at an esoteric level. While theosophy does not acknowledge that the quantum physics of today, that is coming out everywhere today, is not concerned with mental and emotional matter, I don't know. Why don't you come out, theosophists, and say, yes, we recognize that there is a new physics required for mental and emotional matter. We really must do something, or we're going to lose the society.
Well, you nature always seems to balance everything in time. To come back to sexuality, what do you think? Could nature not aim to have a hermaphroditic time in one side of humanity, either the woman or the man? It will develop into an overall synthesis.
I can only look at the problems of mankind in this respect from an epic point of view. If there are built-in mechanisms for warning mankind about infertility and so on, if these mechanisms are there and there is a call by the Y chromosome, for God's sake, strengthen the chromosome so that it can get fertility back again. If those things are there, then what do the qualities of the higher male, masculine, suggest? They suggest valor and courage and purity and honesty and so on. And if that is so, and they can't get that in the society that we are now generating, if they can't get it there, they're going to look elsewhere. And at the moment it may be a few islands bought by remaining millionaires where men can go hunting, shooting, fishing on their own and do what they like, and or it may be another planet or another moon. And the point that I omitted earlier was that, you see, if we can establish what science is beginning to suggest now, that it is possible to change the DNA coding so that things like valor and purity and chivalry can come out in men and things appropriate to women, it means that we can start training people, as Plato suggested, who can become guardians of the state, high-minded individuals who are trained even before they are aware of it. They're being trained to develop higher triad factors. Then we can also train people to go on space journeys that might take 30 years, and to know what to do when they arrive in a far-flung colony of the Earth. It's all there. It's all there. Just as it's there that your grandchildren will live to be 150. I told you that 25 years ago. Now it's a fact. It's all coming off. Thank you. I've had enough. One more if you have.
Well, I've got one question myself I'd rather later on.
Thank you.
And that is, how far do you consider the tremendous desire throughout society to have sex without conception is affecting these whole issues that you've discussed?
I missed one word. Sex without
Conception
conception.
has affected the whole of this issue.
All right, I'll state another truth that theosophy should have done something about. It is generally recognized, certainly Jung recognized it, it is generally recognized that the highest quality, can I use the word, that a man can develop is the sustaining of his will. And I've had a lot of experience in different parts of this world, and it is generally also understood by some of the leading men of the world that if not the proper, then the most fruitful exercise for sustaining the will is to sustain the orgasm, irrespective of whether it leads to conception. The sustaining of the orgasm, which is the basis of tantric yoga. And that is, if the orgasm can be sustained, I'm only talking about men at the moment, that if the male can protract the orgasm, can protract it and widen it and persist with it and hold off ejaculation, that this is the best exercise for increasing and sustaining the will. Now, why that is not in theosophical teachings, at least at an esoteric level, I don't know. Is it? Oh, where? Send it to me, dear.
Not new.
No, send it to me, dear. No, of course it's not new. There's nothing new under the sun. But that is a factor.
I think it comes in part of the training for Candarino research.
But you can't, and any woman in this audience cannot state it for women, because the research work done on women into the matter of orgasm is very incomplete.
Also, there is a power that is the way I see it. It is to use the will to be totally in command of all your functions. In command before things happen. And it's partly tantric, of course.
Well, sweetie, you're a lady, and I'm a man, and I've been through a world war with men, and men can be very impatient. And I don't know of anything that exceeds the challenge to a man's will than to hold off the ejaculation. And the purpose of the Tantra was to have a vehicle for obtaining the orgasm that would not distract him from, and the vehicle would have to be a very ugly one. Save me.
Well, there are very challenging and interesting set of answers to your questions. I hope you've enjoyed the evening. It's been a tremendous lecture. Thank you very much indeed, Douglas, for your generous and all you've given us of your knowledge this evening. Shall we respond by thanking